Hello guys, and welcome to today's video. And today let's get a little funky and go back in time to play with some retro Pokemon cards all the way back from the 90s when Pokemon Craze had its absolute highest, disregarding the fact that it's exploded in popularity over the past couple of years. No, never mind. The 90s is where we are, and the 90s is what we'll be playing in a Wizards of the Coast format cube. And, yeah, what? You don't know what a Pokemon Cube is? You have not read this suspicious article on Pokemon that they made about cubes? Or watched this very cringy video explaining it? Hi, Eon Forest here, and today we're gonna discuss why cube. Okay, don't worry, I got your back. A Pokemon Cube is a custom curated format where the power level and cards in the cube is all up to the creator. It is similar to a pre-release where you build decks from cards you pull from packs. However, these packs are shared around the table, and each player only take one card out of a pack at a time, creating depth and strategy, and is typically centered around a single retro format. For example, today's cube, we played a Wizards of the Coast retro format, but there's typically RSPK cubes and Diamond and Pearl era cubes as well. In short, that is what a Pokemon Cube is. No questions, no complaints. If you have questions, you can go watch my older video, though I can't vouch for how much better it sounds. Anyways, we gotta set up and draft this bad boy, so let's do that. First, you have to build a deck from all the cards, so you have to come in with some sort of strategy, and that usually ends up being what you find in your first couple of packs. What did you find when you first ripped open that fresh pack without anyone else seeing it? In my case, that was a Haunter, and immediately I thought, that's a new card, I want to play that. So that is what I centered my strategy around, going through each packs and choosing things I feel like can go for a stally strategy, denying my opponent resources, and moving damage around that they do get through off of the Haunter, making it an immortal beast. And another example of something I picked up that I thought would pair very well into my Haunter Alakazam strategy is Mr. Mime, a tried and true friend of Alakazam. With Mr. Mime's barrier ability, is able to stop any damage to it over 30 damage, and that includes after weakness and resistance, meaning most psychic Pokemon can hardly do a thing to Mr. Mime. It's a pretty good counter. However, my wonderful stally heal off thing strategy wasn't exactly going to plan. One thing that happened mid-draft that threw a wrench into my plans was the second Mr. Mime not coming back to me after I wheeled it. Wheeling is a pretty common strategy to see in drafting, because as certain players lock into specific archetypes and deck plan strategies, you will see your cards that you want for your specific strategy less and less contested for. And of course, that means you can start wheeling things, letting something go for a turn and see if it comes back to you, and I was able to successfully wheel several Abras and Kadabras around the table, as well as Alakazam, because I was the only one at that point in time building around that Pokemon. Now unfortunately, I tried to do the same with Mr. Mime, and someone snatched it up right before I could get it, devastating me a little bit. That creates another layer of depth and intrigue to the cube drafting format, and that pretty much sums up the drafting experience. I was able to draft a lot of Disruption, especially Energy Removals, one of the best cards in the format, as well as a whole bunch of Alakazams, and I end up going for a 3/3 Kadabra Abra line because the Kadabra is actually a pretty decent attacker, doing 450 damage. Now, here are the cards I end up dropping from my cube draft, because every single card you do draft, you do not have to play, because you draft about 60 cards, and in this cube, you do 60 card decks, and you need to make room for basic energy, and because it's Wizard of the Coast cube, you want to run probably more than 10 basic energy in your deck to help things run a little bit more smoothly, especially with the disastrous energy removals running all over the place. Most of the things I ended up dropping were Pokemon I didn't have lines for or would just be dead weight. I did end up dropping Switch as well because I felt like that trainer wouldn't be super useful in my deck since my Haunter has free retreat and it was supposed to be the main strategy of my deck. Now, sometimes these decisions come back to bite you because in the middle of the match, you might be like, I drafted that card and I don't have it in my deck, and now I'm losing because I didn't have that single card in my deck. And that is quite frustrating at some points too. But now the draft is finished, we all have our decks built, and it kind of feels like we're gone back in time and we're just playing with whatever cards we could get our hands on, except these cards are highly curated and balanced around each other, and now we all have decently powerful decks that we can go 1v1 against each other with. Quite a fun thing indeed. But before we even start our first match, we need to remember to go over the rules of Wizards of the Coast, because remember, we are playing a completely different Pokemon format at this point in time, and there are quite some different rules that change how the games play. Whoever calls the coin flips go first, and when you're going first, you can play every single card from your hand except evolution Pokemon, because you can't evolve turn 1. Confusion works quite differently too, so does Bird technically as well. But the funniest part about Confusion is if you're confused and you want to retreat, you gotta pay for a retreat first, and then you get to flip a coin, and if tails, you fail to retreat, and you still lose all those energies on that guy. And you can retreat as many times as you want as well, meaning you could either taunt your opponent or try to retreat as many times as you want with that confused Pokemon, but there's no guarantee that that will actually happen. And because there's no supporters in this format, people tend to spam the powerful cards like Bill and Research all the time, causing the format to be pretty volatile. Either you are both dead drawing and manually attaching 1 energy at a time, or someone burns through a third of their deck in 1 turn only to still attach 1 energy and maybe only attack once. It's a very different feeling format, and using a cube to experience the format makes it much more interesting and have a little more depth than it otherwise would have. And now, finally, we can talk about the game. Typically, we only do 1 match after a cube draft, because cube drafts and building a deck and playing a game can be quite taxing, especially if you're not used to it, and very time consuming, so out of the respect of everyone involved, we usually only do 1 match. My deck ended up being based around that Haunter I showed you early, as well as Alakazam, moving damage around and planning to flip for invincibility. I also have a Lickitung, and I know this card can be quite powerful. However, I had access to a Scyther, and I decided to cut it, deciding that I had enough guys with free retreat and attacks going around that I'll be perfectly fine. Well, as we find out very soon, my opponent didn't have a huge strategy going into his draft, but was able to just draft a whole bunch of strong Pokemon because that's how the cube was built, and was able to do just perfectly fine based around that strategy as well. The main problem with his deck is the fact that he has some powerful normal types like Tauros with a crazy high psychic resistance of -30 that nullifies almost entirely my strategy of trying to chip away and remove damage and stall my opponent into victory, and well, we'll just say my deck does one of those things very well. And as the format goes, and how my deck building went, not a whole lot happened. A lot of flipping tails with my Lickitung missing paralysis, until a lot of flipping heads paralyzing my opponent, but only chipping away and never quite getting a KO on either active for quite some time. When it does get around to it, my opponent retreats, and I just healed the damage off of my Lickitung with an Alakazam. Speaking of which, this Alakazam evolution was quite a misplay, because Alakazam itself can't damage Tauros, while the Kadabra, its pre-evolution, probably could, allowing me to actually chip through my opponent's board a bit more. and also removing the damage counters on the Lickitung also ends up backfiring a lot, because eventually I decide I wanted this guy off my board, but since I didn't put any switch in my deck, he was kind of just stuck in the active since I put all the energy I came across onto my bench, powering up the guys I was attacking with. So now I'm stuck with an active Lickitung, slowly trying to tongue wrap things to death and not quite succeeding. My opponent, with the slow start, is able to get his board pretty wide with all these powerful guys out. Successfully though, I have denied most energy my opponent has come across, meaning that though his board is wide, he's not able to reliably power anything up or make his board super stable with attackers. Needless to say, I was pretty tricky happy with the cards I ended up playing, and before long I saw that my deck was just thinner than my opponent's, so I knew this was going to end up being a deck out battle with me probably losing it, and indeed that's how it went. My strategy burned into flames, however beautiful and disgusting it was, and I lost the deck out. Quite a common occurrence for the Wizards of the Coast era. It was really fun to revisit the Wizards of the Coast format in Cube though, because every time we come back and want to play it, you can try new strategies, and having other people involved, taking cards that you potentially want to play, throws a wrench into an otherwise pretty systematic and boring format with not too many different types of decks. Because as it stands, drafting cards to build your deck always means every time you play is going to be a different experience. I would definitely recommend you building and playing a cube if you wanted to get these benefits and revisit some of your favorite childhood formats. Playing a cube tends to make you a better deck builder, since you have to do it quickly and think about your strategy the whole time you are drafting. It also helps you experience different metas, and it just stretches you as a player experiencing different formats. But if all you want to do is make a silly Wizard of the Coast cube where you can just bust it out every once in a while and pretend you're a bunch of kids in the 90s, I think that's also a really good reason to build a cube. And that's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give it a like and share it with a friend. And I'll see you guys all in next week's video. Bye!